I want to show you a little something that I learned at another fellowship while attending it one day. If there are times when you want to give thanks for the beautiful music and you don't feel appropriate applauding, if you raise your hands and do this, it lets the choir know how wonderful you think you are. And now, on to witchery.
Yay.
I grew up loving Halloween and witches. They never scared me, never. They were magical and marvelous to me, and I still feel that way. I have a witch's hat right over there on the ground, and it lives on a shelf in my closet year-round. And a friend once peeked into my closet, saw the hat, and exclaimed, "Oh, that explains so much." Anyway, those of you who have heard other of my sermons know that my interests center around earth-based spirituality and the importance of myth and storytelling in our lives. I constantly enjoy examining how mythic stories affect our existence. Their importance lies in the psychological impact of the story, not in the literal meaning of the story, but in the psychological impact that a story has upon us. For as G.K. Chesterton tells us, fairy tales are more than true, not because they tell us that dragons are real, but because they tell us dragons can be beaten. And myths can impact an entire society, as well as an individual, quite often in a negative manner, i.e. the story myth of the witch as an ugly, evil, old woman. Well, that's a negative influence that's been partly responsible for the societal loss of honor and respect for our elders. How, when, and why did this negative mythology arrive? Well, I'm going to put you through some history of Halloween, ancient goddess religions, the beginnings of the Christian era, the Inquisition, and probably a few other things along the way. So let's begin with Halloween. Some 2,000 years ago or so, the Celts, who lived in what is now the United Kingdom, Ireland, and northern France, and that's that part of France that's called Brittany. They had a festival commemorating the end of the harvest season, and it was called Samhain. And that's spelled S-A-M-H-A-I-N, but pronounced Samhain, and that's been celebrated here during various times of this fellowship, I remember that. And it was considered a magical holiday. It was believed that the spirits of those who died in the past year were unleashed at that time. And so, some of the earth folks dressed up in outlandish costumes to scare the spirits away. Other versions, I love this version, other versions of the myth said that spirits could come back to avenge themselves on living souls who had done them wrong. And so the old earth folks who had done them wrong, they wore costumes so that the spirits wouldn't recognize them. And then there was the belief that fairies were flitting around about also during this period, asking for food from door to door. And if you gave them food, you were rewarded. If you didn't, you were punished. So there's at least a couple of versions of why Halloween, and at least one version of why trick or treat. And then along came the Christians. And en route to developing themselves, they decided to get rid of the pesky pagan holidays by reinventing them as Christian holidays. So in 835 CE, Pope Gregory IV, I can't figure out how they got to 4 Gregories by 835, but they did. Pope Gregory IV moved All Saints' Day from May to November 1st to replace Samhain in people's minds and celebrations. All Saints' Day was also known as All Hallows, and since Samhain was celebrated the night before November 1st, the celebration was known as All Hallows Eve, and that then became Halloween. And by golly, after that, folks, you know what they did? They just celebrated both the pagan and the Christian holidays. One of my favorite adaptations, it's right here today out in our lobby, it's absolutely gorgeous. a celebration of these joint holidays is what is celebrated in Mexico, Latin America, and Spain. They observe All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day with a 3-day celebration starting on October 31st through November 2nd. In most areas of Mexico, November 1st is set aside to honor children who have died, and November 2nd to honor those who have died as adults. Day of the Dead art and decorations are beautiful, if macabre. And if you go out later and look at that beautiful altar out there, it's really quite wonderful. I brought a Day of the Dead mask myself that my sister gave me, but there's some out there on the table that are also just magnificent. And a year ago at this time, a friend of mine passed away in California, and I went down for the service, and his son and his 2 granddaughters had made a Day of the Dead altar for him. And we celebrated, we had his celebration of life, carrying the Day of the Dead altar up to the top of Mount Tamalpais, where we had our little celebration for Peter. And it was absolutely marvelous. And the children guarded that altar with their light from the wind. It was very, very windy, but they were there protecting it. It was marvelous. And the way I personally celebrate all of this is by, well, I decorate my house, lots of orange fairy lights, a witch figure or two. For me, it's the closing of the harvest season and looking to winter. And Leif and I make an extra table setting on one of the nights to honor the departed members of our families. I do believe that they enjoy it. It's a little crowded around that one chair, but they enjoy it. Now then, about the switchery. Let's set off and first of all look at that word, crone. It didn't used to mean ugly older woman. Crone used to mean wise, the wise older woman. And for thousands of years before the Christian era, many cultures worshipped a female deity. She was a goddess, and around the time of the birth of agriculture, she became earth-centered. And in some of our Western civilizations, she was the triple goddess divided into maiden, mother, and crone. The maiden was the young virgin, innocent and pure, all beginnings and hope. The mother was the mature, sexually fulfilled woman in her prime of caretaking and strength. And the crone represented the wisdom of age and experience and the healing power that emerged from that wisdom. And so, prior to the Christian era, women could look for, at least in rural situations, you must understand, women could look to older age knowing that they were needed and respected. And since the goddess was a symbol for all of young women to emulate, maiden, mother, and crone were viewed as personal and helpful guides for living a life. There was no stigma attached to growing older at that time. In fact, it was quite the reverse. So now we come to the rise of Christianity. The following quote is by Jungian psychologist Vivian Crowley. I quote her now. As Christianity began to develop, the traditional rural forms of worship of the triple goddess and the dual male god of light and darkness, they just continued along with the Christianity. And they existed until the imposition of Christianity on the Roman Empire by the Emperor Constantine in the Christian era 324. And Christianity, true to its Judaic parent, was a masculine monotheism. There could be no question of coexistence alongside the older religions. End quote. So, there was no more maiden, mother, crone. Now we had Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And here's a little story from my recovering Catholic past. I was in, I don't know, 4th or 5th grade, I can't remember, and we were discussing the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And in Catholic school, you raise your hand to talk, and so then you stand up very properly and talk afterward. And so Sister said, and I love the sisters, I still do. She said, okay, Elizabeth, stand up. What is it, dear? I said, well, I've been thinking, and don't you think maybe the Holy Spirit was a woman? Well, that didn't go down very well, as you can imagine. I got hauled out into the hallway, and Sister almost burst into tears, saying to me, "Oh, Elizabeth, don't say things like that. That's heresy, my darling, heresy. You could go to hell, darling. Just don't think anything like that." Well, I dutifully burst into tears and promised her to stop thinking. That didn't last very long. Okay, back to the history and the development of Christianity. Well, it became apparent as the centuries went whizzing past that some folks were just not going to give up their love of a female deity. And hybrid religions kept springing up, utilizing both the pagan and the Christian entity. So finally, I bet in desperation, in the 5th century, the Christian church authorized the veneration of the Virgin Mary. Not as a goddess, but not entirely human either. She was the mother of a god. Women were to emulate her as a role model, and oh boy, had she been sanitized, which meant that women had to be either saint-like or they were probably whores, or worse, instruments of the devil. Well, I left the Catholic Church, but I brought Mother Mary with me. I love her dearly, and she's very different than they think she is. So with no mother or crone mythology, women were left with no juicy, vibrant midlife image or any useful image of respected elder. You went to a man as you were unsoiled. You birthed and raised as many children as God gave you, which if they or you didn't die in the process, they got up to a count of, you could get up to 14 or 15. After that, they were expected to head out to pasture, not as a wise old woman, but just as an old woman. And with that, I'm going to take you to the Inquisition. The intertwined development of culture and religion is always extremely complex and multi-layered. And so, it just kept going. Christianity and paganism were still intertwined. They couldn't entirely wipe out the myth of the crone as a role model. It simply got included into the Christian traditions, at least for a while. And so now think back on that reading that I did. During the Middle Ages, the rural life at the time almost always included a wise old woman, or what was called a cunning man, who would create natural medications, cared for the sick, help with childbirth, and bury the dead. Well, the Roman Christian Church had long been consolidating its power and authority over all of life and all ways of thinking. Jews and heretics had been bullied and burned for a couple of centuries, and then the church added witchcraft as its prime burning target. Anything that smelled of pre-Christian pagan was deemed connected to the devil, and the caring village crone and the cunning man became witches. The added advantage of these evil witches was that the church could take possession of all of the lands once they had taken them up and burned them. Now this all took place after the Bible of the Inquisition, Hammer of the Witches, was published in the 15th century. Thousands of people were tortured and killed this time. It's estimated that 80% of them were women. The cooking cauldron, the house broom, the household cat, they became symbols not of domesticity, but of the witches' tools of evil. And the wise women became seen as twisted and ugly, because as a witch, she was evil, and evil was ugly. Well, you know who we are. Here's a quote from an online site. First, there's something that needs to be made clear. The word witch is derived from the two Old English words. One of them is wicca, W-I-C-C-E. It means wise one. And wicca, W-I-C-C-A, and it means healer. The witches were wise women who lived in harmony with nature and its seasons. They were skilled in the use of herbs and were often called upon to cure the ill, end quote. Now, there was a pagan sect that was called the witches' religion. And All Hallows Eve was the high holiday of pagan celebrations of the witch, and supposedly Supposedly, that's when she wrote her broom about to observe the goings-on. But this religion didn't become demonized until after the Inquisition, and very few of the hideous number of women and men tortured and killed during the witch craze were indeed actual pagan witch practitioners. There's a modern day religion of Wicca. It's dedicated to caring for the earth and developing the spiritually intuitive powers of coven members. It rests in goodness. And I very much admire the writing of one of Wicca's prominent members. Her spirit name is Starhawk. She's a Wiccan. This next statement that I'm going to read you, that she feels like was written before our present administration. Ready? She feels that the world today is threatened by the same malevolent spirit of domination that caused the witch craze of the Inquisition. She says, whether our immediate needs are for food, health care, jobs, child care, housing, open spaces, our ultimate interest is the same: restoring a sense of the sacred to the world. And so restoring value to our own lives and to the community of beings, human, plant, and animal, that share life with us. End quote. Bless her. So there we are. The good woman was named a witch, and she was demonized and reviled. We now, this present day, we've really worked hard to reverse that image. Our solution is mostly based on our rational rejection of magic, which witches simply don't exist. But there's a further damaging image of the witch in that mythic story that's persisted. It's that older men and women are witch-like in that they're weak and useless in their aging. They are a drain on society. For present-day society worships youth in its attempt to deny death. But as the baby boomers age, they're attacking the image of the weak, helpless old fogey. Humans are living longer, we're learning to get to the gym, walk, ride the bike. So we're gaining in health, strength, and stamina. And the further part of this is we wish to continue to contribute as we age. And society must come to understand that it needs our wisdom and to reach with respect for guidance. There's a wonderful woman, her name is Mary Catherine Bateson, and she wrote a book called, and it's one you might very much like to read, Composing a Future Life. See, part of the challenge then in growing older is to discover the ways arising from a lifetime of experience and in spite of reduced strength and stamina in which it continues to be possible to contribute. The corresponding challenge of society is to recognize that contribution and to benefit from it instead of dismissing it. And she calls that the age of active wisdom. So, in this present time, my witch is a woman of any age. She's robust, colorful, loving, and if older, she can still dance and jig around her cauldron. In closing, during the fall, we let go of summer and the sun, and we think back through the days of light, and we give thanks. It's a time to remember our past and thank our ancestors. The old holiday of Halloween reminds us to do that. My costume is always that of a witch because she still resides in my imagination, vibrantly alive, brewing healing herbs in her cauldron, using her broom to sweep away the dead leaves, which are the happenings of the past year, to make way for the repose of winter. She beckons to us with open arms. She's the mythic fall earth spirit, telling us to care for the earth and each other. She's the wise, good, ageless woman of wonder. And she is magical, because with her wisdom, she can help translate fear and hatred into giving and loving. She is the good